In the last few years, it became a bit easier to talk about. I had many, many years to think about it. Now, the movie, you know, portrayed it as a very horrific and traumatic experience. It was just, you know, that's how I viewed it at the time. But it took me a lot of thinking to realize that it wasn't just some kind of a thing where they, you know, decided to pick somebody up and probe them and torment them and do experiments, you know. I think that what happened when I got out of that truck and went up close like that, that it was totally unexpected. Now, Steve and Alan said it looked to them like I was in some kind of a trance, like I was under their control. But it didn't feel that way to me. It felt like, you know, just some kind of wild impulse, you know, and I was kind of that way back at the time. But I told them it seemed like it was my own idea, and they would say, well, if they can do mind control, they can make you think it's your idea. But I really think I did something unexpected there. I got too close, and the movie showed the beam as, you know, it's kind of strange because Hollywood loves a light show and they love to exaggerate things. But as much as they fictionalized in the story, when the beam hit me, they dragged that out. It actually was not, in the movie, nearly as violent as it actually was. You know, for years I would give a talk and people would immediately say, what a bunch of cowards those guys were. Take off and leave their friend there, you know. But you got to understand, the one thing about the movie, when they said, he's dead, you know, they said that's what they felt. They were certain it had killed me. It was so violent, it threw me, you know, Steve says 20 feet through the air, and John says that my body fell like a sack of meat, you know, like there were no bones in my body. Mike says that, you know, the dust boiled up around me, the way I fell so limp and didn't, you know, try to break my fall or in any way protect myself. They had every reason to think that they just witnessed one of their guys get killed and that they were next. So rather than, you know, them being called cowards, I'd say they were heroes. You know, it took a lot of courage to come back that night. When they got down the road in the movie, you know, Mike says, look, we got to go back. And they said, no, we don't want to go back. And he said, well, whoever wants to go with me can go, and whoever doesn't can stay here. In real life, nobody volunteered to stand alone and wait beside the road in the dark. In the movie, they all went back with Mike. And, you know, that was pretty heroic, because they would have had every excuse to just go straight into the authorities. But they felt, you know, if there was any chance that they could, you know, rescue me, that they were going to try. So on their way back to there, they saw it take off, streak off through the sky. So, you know, Kenny said he wasn't so afraid that they would come back, but he was more afraid of what my body was going to look like. You know, laying there all charred or something, you know, something really horrible. They even argued about whether it had disintegrated me, you know, that, you know, Steve was saying, no, I saw him hit the ground and he was in one piece. But when they got back there and they couldn't find me, then they decided to go get help. Now, Alan was arguing, nobody's going to believe this. Let's just get some friends with guns and come back, and then if we can't find Travis, then we'll report it. But some of the others said, well, look, you know, if Travis can never be found, it's not going to look good if we don't report this right away. So I've had a lot of years to think about it, and like I was starting to tell you that, you know, at the time it was so horrific, you know. I woke up lying on the table in tremendous pain. Something was terribly wrong inside. I felt, you know, that I was mortally wounded. And, but I thought I was in a hospital. I thought I was in safe hands. I could hear the sounds of movement around me. I felt this instrument over my chest. And, but one thing that added to the panic, a lot of people don't understand. You know, they think, oh, I wouldn't be that scared. I'd keep my cool and ask good questions and, you know, grab a souvenir or something. But, you know, there was all kinds of things coming together to contribute to me just completely losing control out of total fear. And probably the number one thing was the feeling of suffocation. It was either due to the injury of being hit by that blast of energy, or maybe that the atmosphere in there was not suitable for humans. But that feeling of suffocation generates a feeling of panic that you just can't reason away, you know? The feeling that I was dying, that something was really terribly wrong, and then the feeling that I couldn't get enough air. You know, in the movie, the actor's held down on the table, and there's this membrane over his face. Well, that didn't actually happen. There was no membrane. But I think that's one fictionalization that does a better job of communicating the reason for my panic, because trying to scream through that, trying to breathe through that, lets you understand better than if you just saw the actor standing there, you know, looking terrified. You know, you wouldn't really understand that feeling of suffocation. I use the example of waterboarding. You know, this is a technique that the enemy knows about, our people know about. They do it as part of their training. Both sides do it, but even though they even practice it, it still works, because that feeling of suffocation generates a level of fear beyond anything that you can control. So when I finally could focus my eyes enough to see these creatures standing there, then I realized I was not in the hospital. And I just totally freaked out. And here I'm trying to move, but I feel so weak, and that adds to the panic. You know, dimly lit, claustrophobic, very humid, suffocating feeling, the feeling of being injured, and then to see this face right there, you know, so close to mine, totally alien, realizing here I am, I'm trapped, you know, and associating the pain I was feeling, the feeling of injury, with my situation. So I just tried to hit him away, but I could hardly even move my arm. But as weak as that was, I was surprised how easily it fell back away from me. When they came around the table towards me, this is, I'll just, a quick aside, this service station here is where they met the law enforcement men that night, and just a few weeks ago they tore that down. So that Travis film that I had out there earlier, I'm all sold out of, some of that was filmed right there on the site, but that no longer exists. When they came around the table towards me, they stared into me in a way that I found really disturbing. It was very difficult. That was the focus of my nightmares for a long time after that, those eyes just boring into me. And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on there. I was being filmed, interviewed for a new movie coming up in the future called 701. That refers to the 701 unresolved cases from the Air Force's Project Blue Book. And the day I was filmed there, some of these school kids from that incident in Zimbabwe, there was 60 kids at recess, and this craft came down in broad daylight and communicated to them. So I asked these girls, what that felt like, because I was trying to figure out why that stare was so excruciating. It just gave me this squirmy feeling in my head. And they said, no, it was pleasant, wasn't painful. They received some messages, but none of the negative that I experienced there. And so, right after I was returned, I had a whole battery of medical tests, and one of those was a brainwave scan, an EEG, and the technician was not told who I was. There was so much media frenzy that I was put in there by the doctor under an assumed name. So that was actually very useful to get a sort of an unbiased opinion about what these charts meant. And what it showed was an anomalous wave pattern. And we're doing some follow-up research on that. A, to see if that pattern is still there, and also to consult with some neuroscientists about how this compares with people who've been hit by lightning or electrocuted or something like that. So there's a lot of ongoing research going on here. But a medical doctor came up to me at one of my recent conferences, and he says, you know, you're associating this stare with this discomfort. And you're saying, you know, and anatomically, the major openings in the skull are through the eye holes in the skull. And so I'm thinking that what was going on there is that they were trying to communicate or regain control or subdue me, and it wasn't working because of that injury. This blast of energy that hit me had caused a lingering scrambling of the neural circuits, and they weren't able to get me to calm down or keep me unconscious on the table. And when that wasn't working, they took off. You know, I was thinking of fighting my way past them. Maybe they knew what I was thinking in that sense, but I was, you know, as weak as I was, you know, much bigger than them and much more powerful, and I think they just took off and got help. There were some beings there that I then encountered that looked like human beings, and I think that you know, it took me decades to figure this out, that horrific feeling that stare gave me was just them trying to get me under control, but it just added to my panic. So when the human-looking beings came in and took me out of there, I think it was a species that, you know, would have the technology and the knowledge of human physiology to in a better position to help me and finish the repairs. I mean, I'd been revived to the extent where I wasn't dead anymore, but after they got done with me, you know, everything was fine. So also just the reassuring, you know, I was out of control, totally hysterical, you know, and assuming that these were from some Earth-based agency, Air Force or something, that were there to rescue me from these monsters, as I thought at the time, you know, I calmed down and was cooperating with them. But when they took me out of there into another part of this huge complex, and they started trying to put me down on the table and not answering. You know, I kept screaming all these questions, but, you know, I was so hysterical, I can understand why they wouldn't even try to reason with me. And so I, you know, started to fight them, but they got this mask over my face, which I think rendered me unconscious. And I was able to get my finger under the edge of it and try to pull it away, but I blacked out. And painlessly, but next thing I know, I woke up on the highway in time to see this craft taking off. But my reassessment of the whole situation was that it was necessary to get me back under to finish the healing that needed to be done because of the incredible violence of that injury, that blast of whatever it was. And we've investigated quite a bit in connection with radiation effects at the site. There were high radiation readings on the men's hard hats, and there was also some unusual magnetic readings that were taken over the area that dissipated. The follow-up research with the Geiger counters, both this summer before last and also when National Geographic was out there 3 or 4 years ago, showed normal levels, and things had gone back to normal with the magnetic and the radiation. But we came to find out those phone booths where I called for help are still there. They don't function as phone booths anymore. It's kind of a local monument or something. We're going to look at fully restoring them. There's my brother, my beloved brother, who protected me in the days following the incident. And great personal sacrifice, and he's no longer with us. But I wouldn't have survived those days without him. This is him at best man at my wedding. This is some Freedom of Information Act documents on Phil Klass, our famous UFO skeptic there. Come to find out, he was under investigation by the FBI for his dissemination of classified material in connection with his job as an editor of Aviation Week and Space Technology. So what this document, this memo right here shows, as that, this is from J. Edgar Hoover, who was the head of the FBI at the time, to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And you know, pre-9/11, those agencies were under great criticism for not interacting and not cooperating enough. But here we have communication direct from J. Edgar Hoover to the director of the CIA, basically turning the investigation of Philip Klass over to the CIA. And so, to me, this is, with some other memos in that file, indication that Philip Klass was on some government payroll in his efforts to discredit this case, throwing every ridiculous accusation he could, even going so far as to offer Steve Pierce, the youngest man on the crew, a $10,000 bribe to discredit the incident. And all of that failed, of course, because this is some quotations from the file. The Newark FBI office suggests a reading of the letter from Klass indicates he's most likely not in full possession of his faculties. In view of Klass's intemperate criticisms and often irrational statements he made to support them, it was recommended that the Bureau be most circumspect in any future contacts with him. So there's a 9-line redact, all blacked out, and not to be of assistance to his government. So that's the smoking gun concerning that. But anyway, back to the evidence at the site. These high radiation readings caused a remarkable effect. It caused an extremely rapid growth of the trees. Now, when this was first discovered, Mike took this core sample here. And you can see, counting back 15 years from the time that he took the sample, right before the movie came out, there was a huge jump in the thickness of these growth rings. There's annual rings. It's one ring for each year. And that represented a 36 times the previous rate of growth. So you can see that roughly doubling in diameter in 15 years when the tree was 100 years old. Well, this recent follow-up research that we did with Ben Hansen supervising. He was the host of the TV show Fact or Fake, former FBI agent. And he found online some research concerning the Scots pine species in the vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear accident. And he found that those trees, even though the radiation was coming from all sides, had grown at 3 times their normal rate. So, you know, it's kind of counterintuitive. You would think that radiation would just cause living things to wither and die, but in the case of these pine trees, it somehow causes some kind of scar tissue or some kind of accelerated growth in response to the radiation. So this was discovered here recently under Ben Hansen's supervision, is that the growth effect was only on the side of the tree, greatest on the side of the tree towards where the craft was. So you had this jump in radiation, you know, depending whether you were north, east, west, or south of where the craft came down. The source of the stimulation for this accelerated growth was directional. The reason we didn't know it at the time this sample was taken is that Mike was trying to be very careful not to kill the tree. So he just did a core from the outside edge into the center and then plugged the hole with some putty and a wooden plug shape just to fill the hole. So it was unknown that it was only on the side of the tree towards where the craft had come down. And further to that point, when I got out of the truck, Kenny Peterson was the crewman sitting next to me where I had been, and I left the door open. And he's now developed skin cancer on that arm towards the open side. So all tests on me as far as radiation were concerned were negative. There was no ill effects. So I think whatever happened there was healed in their efforts to correct the effects of being injured like that. This is just one of those amazing little interesting coincidences. Looking at a sectional map, it was divided off into 80-some different sections and areas. And I looked to see the area where the incident happened, and it was Area 51. And actually, one of the least populated areas in the entire state. Anyway, there's another coincidence. My son on the right, D.B. Sweeney on the left. But my son was with me at Roswell and said, "Oh, you brought D.B. Sweeney with you." I know, what? You know, and then I go, "Yeah, there is an amazing resemblance between these guys." But again, just a coincidence. I talk about coincidence in my book, Aristotle cautioning against attaching undue significance to coincidence, saying it's inevitable that the unusual will sometimes occur. I say, yeah, indeed it will. So, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in a lot of different directions here. You know, we'll follow up research on the medical, the tree growth stuff at the site, this stuff with this government covert attempt to suppress it. And for example, during promotion for the movie, I got a phone call from a guy that said he was out there deer hunting at the time of the incident. And he had witnessed the glow of the craft through the trees and then the blast of energy when the beam hit me. And he was describing the surrounding terrain, and I knew that he would have had to have been there to know that in that kind of detail, because that was never a part of any news reporting. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Hey, we got an independent witness. He said, you know, he was deer hunting with his wife, and they were now divorced, but she would corroborate his story. So I told Tracy Torme, the screenwriter on the movie, about it, and they flew him out to Hollywood, interviewed him, and then they had him tested by the state police polygraph examiner that tested all of us. And some very interesting results. He took 2 tests. One of them was about being there, seeing the glow of the craft, the blast of energy, and even the part about him being in military intelligence. See, he told me he'd never come forward back when it happened because he'd consulted with his superior officers and these guys are accused of murder, shouldn't I come forward? And he was told, well, if they're not indicted, stay out of it. So he said that was the reason he didn't come forward. And so he passed all that part of the test. But when they asked him questions about having connections to this UFO debunker and efforts to discredit the incident, he flunked that part. Very strange. So, and then years later I ran into a guy that was a part of one of these patriot sort of patriot militia types, you know, and they said that this guy came in there trying to join their group and basically infiltrate, but he was bragging about having been out there deer hunting when this incident happened. So, you know, the guy was still doing his job, I guess. So there's been a whole lot of attempts to suppress this, a whole lot of covert information, you know, this Freedom of Information Act thing, that's a recent discovery. Here recently, Mike ran into his neighbors from across the street at the time of the incident, and they said that the government came and rented out their upstairs to the feds so they could sit up there and surveil him and his comings and goings. And then later he mentioned this to them again, and they said, no, we never said that. So apparently their people came and said, hey, you signed a non-disclosure on that one, so now they're trying to deny that they said that. But Steve, you know, was pursued with this $10,000 bribe offer. John says that we'd walk out of his house and there they are parked down the street, you know, government vehicle, government plates, you know, just typical Men in Black type things, watching his moves. But what's really strange, nothing towards me. That UFO debunker, he was constantly harassing Mike and Steve. Not one call, not one letter to me. You know, news media could always reach me. I don't understand the reason for that. But, you know, because we're running close to the end of our time slot here, I want to just open it up to questions. There's so much to talk about here, but we can't fit it all. Every talk I give is you know, covers a different area. But I'll start taking some questions and see if we can bring out some of those kind of things. Yeah?
Do you feel you've ever been contacted again?
I get that question. Have I ever been contacted again? You know, people were always praising me for coming forward. I didn't come forward. You know, I tried to avoid the media for weeks, and then they started criticizing me about that. Oh, you must have something to hide. So I found out if I didn't agree to do the interview, it didn't make the interview go away, it just made it more negative. So reluctantly, I came forward and talked about it to set the record straight, you know. All kinds of stupid accusations, like this class guy claiming it was all a drug hallucination. In spite of the fact that I had blood and urine samples put through the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's drug screen, which proved there were no trace of any drug in my body. And beside the fact that 7 people are not going to experience an identical hallucination. And how does that cause magnetic readings and you know, radiation readings and on and on? Come to find out, when we got a hold of the sheriff's file, that there were other campers, hunters, fishermen in the area who had come to the sheriff and reported it. And some of those other witnesses, seeing the craft coming or going, contacted me directly. But the question was, did I have any more experiences? And so I have to say, I didn't willingly come forward, and so if anything more was to happen, I'm not going to go public with it, except if I can document it, you know. And there's a few things that I don't talk about because I can't prove it. But in this case, there was one sighting. There was a MUFON meeting in Burbank Jan Harzan was speaking, and Tracy Torme, the screenwriter on the movie. And when they got done, I was headed home. Going up the 5 towards the 10 to come back to Arizona. And this giant black triangle came right towards us, stopped right over the top of us, turned, and went off towards the west. And, you know, I can document that because my son was driving and my girlfriend was in the back seat, and so they saw it too. And then when I got home, my other son found a website that records them on a map with a little circle and a number. It's called UFOstalker.com. And there was a whole cluster of sightings right there at that time and place. So I was amazed that over a city like LA that you wouldn't have many more reports, but you know, sometimes people don't look up. You know about the Phoenix Lights, a giant black triangle viewed by hundreds. But, another question.
Yes. Have you had any more memories or flashbacks that you had in your book?
When I was doing all these interviews for the movie, you know, that really stepped up the amount of talking about it that I was doing. I started getting these little dreams, not so much about the nightmare type with the little creatures, but more with the human type. So I went to Tracy Torme and I said, do you think maybe some of these memories are coming back? And he goes, nah, it's probably just because you're doing all these interviews and thinking about it more. But then when I asked him the same question recently, he goes, oh yeah, that was probably memories leaking back through. So I guess he changed his opinion. We got time for one more real quick.
Like when you were like in the movie, they show it's all cluttered and slimy.
Oh yeah, okay, exact opposite. The way it really looked in there was not organic and all cluttered and like that. It was very sterile, very, you know, pretty. There wasn't stuff laying around. It was fairly featureless, very mechanical, metallic, and quite the opposite. So we're going to try to get a remake, and I'm collecting emails from people who expressed the desire to see a more accurate retelling. And since we're out of time, I'm going to be back out here at my table, and I can answer any further questions you have there. Then thank you for listening.
You